Hi, this is Tara. Today, let's study Sutra number 9. śabda-jñāna-anupātī vastu-śūnyaḥ vikalpaḥ. What does this mean? In Maharishi Ved Vyasa's commentary, the 9th Sutra is translated as imagination is followed in sequence by verbal expression and knowledge and is devoid of objective substratum. Now, how does he explain this? He says that this is knowledge that does not reach real cognition or unreal cognition. For instance, you might have the question, why is imagination not unreal cognition? That is because even in the absence of objective substratum, its action is dependent on the power of verbal expression and knowledge. So, for instance, in real cognition, you have an object, the perception does not correspond. However, here, even in the absence of an object, its relevance, it becomes relevant due to the power of verbal expression and knowledge. So there being no objective substratum for either the distinction or the absence thereof, imagination shows an unreal image of the substratum, and it is not therefore an act of real cognition, nor is it unreal cognition because it differs from it in being recognized as such in practice. Okay, so Vachaspati Mishra's glossary is a bit more, explanatory. And he says predication, is the relationship between the predicate and that which is predicated of it. Okay, so it's basically what he's saying is it's the relation between a quality or a characteristic and the thing that is qualified. So an example that they use is, this is Chaitra's cow. Okay, so you have the cow, and the quality of the cow is that it belongs to Chaitra. But that is what Maharishi Ved Vyasa says, is the belonging to Chaitra is not really quality of the cow. Okay, so an example that Maharishi Ved Vyasa gives is that Purusha is inactive and characteristics of the object are denied to it. Okay, Purusha is inactive and characteristics of the object, basically what they mean is Purusha is formless, inactive, and does not have any qualities. Okay. However, what he says is, especially in Sankhya philosophy, there is no such thing as the absence of characteristics. I make that distinction because, for instance, in Buddhism, nothingness is a very real thing. However, in the Sankhyas, there is no such thing as absence of characteristics. Okay, it is not objectively real or unreal. It only exists in verbal expression. So you cannot say the absence of characteristic is a quality of Purusha. So he says the description of non-existence does not exist in Sankhya. So the meaning of the root itself is understood by the act of cessation of motion. So for instance, what Ved Vyasa says is non-existence that is described as positive, as a thing, that the non-existence or the absence or the voidness, when it is described as a thing, that is pure imagination. Okay, because why? Because it depends purely on verbal expression. It does not objectively exist. Swami Satyananda, I find, is the most insightful when studying Sutra 9. He translates anupātī as following upon. So he says following upon knowledge through words, but empty of an object is fancy. Very simple translation. Following upon knowledge through words, but empty of an object is fancy. So I have words to describe it, but it doesn't exist. That is vikalpa. Now he says vikalpa is imagination without the basis of an object. It does not mean that it has no object, but that the object stated is non-existent. The example he gives is, for instance, Gulliver's Travels, any fantasy book, Peter Pan, Harry Potter. Vikalpa is basically a creation of the mind. It has no objective existence. However, that does not mean it is devoid of experiential material. We still experience Harry Potter. What we are experiencing is the imagination. We take ideas from our experiences and combine them to form new ideas of things that do not actually exist. So sometimes the mind becomes very full of fancy and idealism. What I find interesting is Swami Satyananda is the only teacher, guru, who basically does not completely discard vikalpa as harmful or unnecessary. He says, many people, for instance, try to achieve an imaginary goal. So Vikalpa is important. He says in meditation, dhyana, sometimes there's a flight of imagination. It may give us pleasure. We may feel we see something, we experience something. But according to him, Patanjali says this also has to be set aside if one has to progress. And it is, Patanjali describes it as a dull state of mind to be overcome through right knowledge. Now, this is helpful, he says, because it can make the aspirant go deeper into a state of concentration. If you have a specific experience when you are meditating, a lot of us have this, that might spur you on to meditate more, to come back to it, and you may be chasing something. But basically what he says is this allows you to go deeper into the process, but it is a sadhana that should be discarded afterwards. In the states of dharana or antarmana, which are advanced states, dhyana, the aspirant imagines objects and qualities. Now, they may be unreal, but they are helpful in the beginning, and a student of yoga must use their assistance until he goes forward to master a deeper state. Okay, so it is declared by many great thinkers that up to nirvikalpa samadhi, the different experiences are nothing but the planes of one's mental consciousness. So, right knowledge, wrong knowledge, and imagination, he says, are equally processes of consciousness, just that they differ. In that, right knowledge has a true object. Very beautiful and simple explanation. Right knowledge has a true object, wrong knowledge has a false object, imagination has no object. Okay, beautifully explained. So Swami Vivekananda says verbal delusion follows from words having no corresponding reality. There's another class of vrittis called vikalpa. A word is uttered, we don't want to understand the meaning, we jump to conclusions. He says this is also vikalpa. He sees it more as misconception. And he says this is a sign of weakness of the chitta. BKS Iyengar says verbal knowledge devoid of substance is fancy or imagination. And he says playing with fanciful thoughts or words and living in one's own world of thoughts and expressions which have no substantial basis is vikalpa. Now, it basically becomes a vague or an uncertain knowledge that does not correspond to reality, and it is, in a sense, a state of delusion. Now, he says if vikalpa can be brought to a state of correct knowledge through viveka, through discrimination, through analysis, through trial and error, it can awaken a thirst for correct knowledge. And so it is only when this delusion is transformed, according to BKS Iyengar, that vikalpa knowledge based on imagination is useful to us. Otherwise, it remains without substance. Osho says that an image conjured up by words without any substance behind it is vikalpa, imagination. And it is just basically verbal structures. The thing is not there, but you create it through your mental image. And you create it to the extent that you are deceived by it and you think it is real. Now, this can be useful in the sense of, everybody believes something about themselves and somebody comes and tells you, oh, you're very beautiful. And he gives the example of Greta Garbo, who was discovered, in a barber shop where she was working. But so, you have no concept of your own beauty. And then somebody comes and says, oh, you're so beautiful. Those words, basically, the use of verbal expression and knowledge transform the image of yourself in your mind. And he says image is a force, but it is an imagined force, and you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. Not evil, harm. Imagination can become madness at any moment. It can be useful if you create a situation for your growth. And he says for human beings, and I think this is something that's very relevant to the world we live in today, which is also one of the reasons why I wanted to do, masters from different eras and their commentaries on the sutras, because these are very, very relevant and practically applicable to the world that we live in. And he says, words have great significance for human beings. You cannot incite animals to fight for an animal kingdom, and that's why they don't have wars. But today, if somebody around you shouts fire, you will start running. And you can be incited, and politicians and historians and academics and even companies and industries are using words and advertising and research to sort of stir people up, right? And he says, think about the fact that none of us are born with words, right? It is a vehicle of conditioning. So if you want to approach the truth, if you want to see God, he says, you have to drop the words. You have to go beyond the definitions. I found that very beautiful. Barbara Stoller Miller, simple translation, she says conceptualization is the tendency of thought to construct an image of reality that has no foundation beyond individual subjectivity, and verbal knowledge in which words and meanings fail to correspond to objective reality. So she doesn't go too much more into that. Thank you for listening. This was Sutra 9. Please do come back tomorrow for Sutra